So let's talk about building a flow. Remember that our game is made out of levels, scenes. Within the scenes we have elements, and each element that I add to a scene can trigger a flow. Okay, a flow is this series of actions or events that your player is going to experience in your game. Now think of levels as periods in time. They're like years of your life. You can't go backwards or skip one. We will always experience level 1 and then level 2 and then level 3 in that order. Okay, but within a scene, or within a level, we can have several scenes and we can allow a player to move around those scenes or move from one scene to the next and back to the first scene, for example. That just depends on how we define our navigation. More on this in the navigation video. So we're going to look at a flow here in scene 1, the restaurant scene of level 2. And as you can see, this character, Emily, has a flow built on her, which means we've attached some of the building blocks of the editor in order. And this is a series of events that the player is going to experience when they click on Emily. So in this scene, when I click on Emily, I'm going to see a notification, which is called introduction. It's going to give me some introductory information. I'm going to have a dialogue piece, which is probably a conversation with Emily. Then I'm going to receive a lesson, which is a text block. I'm going to learn about gluten. Then I'm going to have to make a decision. I'm given a choice here and probably given some points for it as well. Next, I'm going to play the mini game Click on Image, where I'm going to be asked to choose between different types of food, whether they have gluten or not. And at the end of this flow, at the end of this series of actions, I'm going to be taken directly to the next scene, which is the kitchen, according to this. So the trigger for launching this flow is clicking on Emily. As you can see, the other characters and the other object in this scene don't have any flows built on them. That means there's no other building blocks attached to them. That means that when I click on the croissants or I click on the waiter or on Fred, nothing's going to happen because there's nothing built there to happen. So only Emily is the thing that I can interact with in this scene right now. When I click on Emily, I will always experience the full flow in this order. It'll always be one after the other in the order that they are added here. You can add or blocks in between if you've decided you want to add extra pieces in between one block and another, or you can add at the end using this here. Remember that flows are normally only experienced one time. That means I'm going to click on Emily and I'm going to see this series of events. If at some point in the game I end up back in this scene and I click on Emily again, nothing is going to happen because this flow has already been experienced. If I want this flow to be repeatable, I have to add a new building block, which is called reactivate flow. And that will make sure that every time I click on Emily, I will experience this flow. Now, bear in mind, you're going to experience exactly the same conversation and the same decision. So here it doesn't make much sense for this flow to be repeatable. We don't want them to be repeating this particular series of actions. Now, you might have noticed that when I'm trying to add a building block here at the end, all of my other building blocks are deactivated except for the reactivate flow, because that is the only building block that I can add after a change scene. If you think about it, this is logical because once I've experienced these events, I'm going to go to a different scene. So whatever is built here wouldn't be seen anyway. I wouldn't be accessing it. So the only block that goes after a change scene is a reactivate flow to make that particular flow of events repeatable. One good example of flows that we want to make repeatable are, of course, doors. So we want to be able to click on a door, like the door we created earlier. We want to go to the office. And in the game, if I come back to the basement, I want to be able to use this door again to go to the office again. So on this one, it makes sense to add a reactivate flow. I want this door to be active all the time. Now, every time I click on the door, this is going to happen. So here we are in our basement scene, and we're going to look at building a couple of flows into this scene. We already have two very small flows in this scene. If you can see from the clickable area, we've created a door that will take us to the office, and we have an automatic trigger that gives me a welcome message as I enter the room. So what do I want to happen in this room? I've got Susan and I've got Stephen's secret file. So my story here is that I'm going to meet Susan in this creepy basement, and she's going to give me a file with some classified information. So the first thing I want to happen is that when I click on Susan, I want to have a conversation with her. For this, we're going to use the dialogue piece. So I'm going to go ahead and add it. I'm going to call this conversation with Susan. Here you can add a background image to give your conversation a sense of place. It's not necessary to add one in every conversation. Here I'm going to add the first line of dialogue to this conversation and choose who's going to be speaking. So the person speaking here is obviously Susan. We're going to pick her from the list. So here's Susan. Now I'm going to give her her name and give her a mood. We're going to say she's happy to see you here in the basement, and she's going to be speaking. So a simple, quick instruction from that player, and we'll save this piece. So now you can see when I click on Susan, I'm going to have a conversation with her. And when I click on Stephen's file, I want to open the file and receive a lesson. So here I'm going to include a text piece. I'm going to call it lesson 1. I want to decide if I'm going to save this document to the phone. So if I want this document to be available later in the phone, I can choose to save it. You can not save it. You can save it as a lesson. You can save it as a reference document. You can save it as a hint, or you can save it as a note. This just defines how it is visible in the phone. So this one, for example, is going to be a lesson. And I'm going to call it lesson 1 confidential. And here I'm going to just paste in some text that I've already prepared for this lesson, and I'm going to save this piece. All right, so here we've built 2 very short flows. We're going to have a conversation with Susan, and we're going to look at the files, receive a lesson, and perhaps after looking at the files, I want to give my player a short test. So here I can include my test. I'm going to call it test 1 and make sure that I'm checking if they understood. Let's say this is a question. Correct answer. We'll mark that one as the correct one. The feedback for the correct answer is very important. And the incorrect. Here is also where I will decide whether to give or take away points if I get the answer correct or incorrect here. More on that later. And I'm going to save the piece. So let's preview our flow.